Hey, what's up everyone? My name is Alec Wenzel. I'm a professional guitar player living in Denver, Colorado, and today we are talking about volume pedals. And specifically what we were talking about is where they should go in your pedal chain to achieve specific sounds. What you heard me doing there in the intro was rocking my foot back and forth on a volume pedal in order to get those ambient swells, but we're going to talk about what they sound like before and after your drive section and sort of before and after your wet effects and why I choose to put mine where I do. Now, before we get into all of that, can you please like and subscribe? That kind of thing really helps me out. I'm trying to grow the channel. It's free to you, and if you hate it, you can unsubscribe later. But we talk about gear here and we do short lessons, and I think it's a fun time and you might enjoy it. So, with that, let's jump into places you should put your volume pedal on your pedal board. So, as with all things music and art, there are no hard and fast rules, and there's no specific rule about what order your pedals should go in. But if you want to get really specific about it, like we do in this video, then I can think of 5 good places to put this volume pedal. Now, those places are before your drive section, after your drive section, before your wet effects, after your wet effects, and then finally, if you do any sort of glitchy tape looping with your pedals, having a volume pedal after those effects can be very beneficial as well. Now, why do I want to put my volume pedal in one of those 5 places? Well, there's advantages and disadvantages to each of those spots, but the main reason is that different pedals react differently to having a certain amount of guitar signal sent through them. So if you turn your volume pedal down, it's like turning the volume knob down on your guitar. And doing that in each of these different spots can elicit a different effect from the pedals that follow it, or even sometimes the pedals that precede it. So we're going to jump into talking about what the advantages and disadvantages of each of those positions are. We're just going to do a short example of each of them so you can sort of decide for yourself what makes the most sense. So to kick things off, let's talk about that first position I mentioned. What is the advantage of having a volume pedal in front of your drive section? Well, the advantage of having a volume pedal in front of your drive section is that you can get what we call cleanup. Now, this is the idea that we are getting 2 sounds from a single overdrive or fuzz. We can get those 2 sounds from this single overdrive or fuzz by controlling the amount of volume going to them. If we have a very saturated sound with our volume all the way up, we can remove some volume and get a nice crunchy like rhythm sound or something that, isn't as forward in the mix. But then as soon as we want to go full on into our heavily saturated overdrive tone for solos or a larger chorus section, we just add that volume back in. So let's hear what that sounds like. So what you heard me do there was start with the toe down, so we're getting the full amount of volume headed into that fuzz at the very front of my pedal chain. Then you heard me remove some of that volume headed into that fuzz so we could hear the cleanup. And then you heard me add it all the way back in to get up to our original saturation. Now, this is a pretty great way to control volume headed into our overdrive section. So what is the disadvantage? Well, the disadvantage is just redundancy. If this pedal functions basically the same as the volume knob on your guitar, then why wouldn't you just use the volume knob on your guitar? That's how most people tend to control volume headed into their fuzz and drive section. That's how I like to do it. And it's because I don't want to have the exact same effect in the exact same place on my pedal board. And that's essentially what this is doing. I can get more out of this by moving it further down the chain without giving anything up because I still have the volume knob on my instrument. So with that, let's talk about why we might want to put this after our drive section. So what is the advantage of putting a volume pedal after your drive section? Now we're starting to get into the middle of the pedal board here, so we're entering a little bit of a Venn diagram. This will be after drives and before wet, and we'll talk about why that's advantageous separately, but just sort of realize that you can achieve multiple things here by putting it in different spots. So why should I put this after my drives? Well, putting it after your drive section can help you keep that full saturation that we were talking about a second ago, because the volume knob is all the way up on your guitar, and you can control how loud that full saturation is. This is also effectively creating two different drive sounds for us. Now, it's not light saturation, heavy saturation, it's more same saturation at two different volume levels. I used this effect in a song that I'd recorded with my old band Pacific Ocean to get a louder and louder lead tone that came up with the whole band that didn't change how saturated my original drive sound was. So we're going to hear what that sounds like. We're going to hear how loud we can be with this turned all the way up, and then we're going to hear that exact same sound, just quieter, when I remove some of the volume with the volume pedal. So hopefully what we heard there was full saturation at full volume, same level of saturation at half volume, and then back up to our full volume. And we didn't hear the sort of level of saturation or gain change that entire time. Now, what is the disadvantage of running your volume pedal this way? Well, the disadvantage is that it's not a channel switcher. You run the risk of accidentally pulling all the volume out of your signal chain and creating dead air, or going back to a level that is quieter than what you had before, and now you're sitting differently in the mix. So the way that we would typically achieve this sound is by running two overdrives, right? You've got a rhythm drive, and then you've got a heavier lead drive. And that creates stability between those two volume levels. And while this is a cool way to control the volume level of your drive, it can lead to some inconsistency. So you just want to be aware of that. So now that we've talked about the advantages of having a volume pedal before and after your drive section, we're going to talk about the advantages of having a volume pedal before and after your wet effects. Now, I'm going to cover both the before and after at the same time because they essentially do the same thing. And I know that I separated them in the intro, but it's because I wanted you guys to have the opportunity to hear both. And we'll maybe cover some of the disadvantages afterward, but essentially what you're going for is the same effect, whether or not this is in front of all those effects or after all of those effects. Now, what do I mean when I say wet effects? Wet effects are going to be your modulation, your delay, and your reverb. And the two that we're particularly focused on here are delays and reverbs. This is especially relevant if you want to be doing those big ambient reverb, delay, swell effects. Now, what you're trying to do with this pedal, whether it's before or after, is essentially start with the volume all the way off so that when you hit your guitar strings, you can swell that sound in so that when it hits your giant delays and reverbs, you're not getting this harsh attack. That's what creates those really beautiful blooming sounds. So now that we've talked about that, let's listen to what that sounds like. I'm going to do it both in the same video. We're going to hear it in front of those effects to start, and then we're going to hear it after those effects. I'm going to play the same thing. It's going to sound basically the same. So right at the end there, I threw in a harsh chord at full volume so you could hear what we're trying to avoid by using this volume pedal to swell in after we've attacked the strings. What's happening is when you hit the strings that hard, the delays and reverbs are hearing all that harshness from the attack of the pick, and then the ambience is following it, right? We're just using the volume pedal to cut that part out before it happens and swell in the pure ambience that would follow. Now, hopefully you heard that there wasn't a ton of difference between having this in front of the wet effects or after the wet effects, but the one disadvantage that I kind of wanted to cover was that If you have this at the very end of your chain and you go to swell in that wet effect, there is the chance that you could still catch some of that harshness because you didn't stop the pedals from hearing that harsh attack. You're just hoping that it's faded out before you fade that sound in. The one way to guarantee that your pedals won't hear the harsh attack is if you have it in front of them and then you hit the chord and swell in after you're sure that that attack has stopped. And so that's our one disadvantage of having this all the way at the end. But essentially we're creating the same thing and you just might need to be a little careful. So now that we've talked about that, let's jump on over to the last one, after your glitch effects. So like I just said, the last good place to sort of put a volume pedal would be after any of your glitchy looping effects, and even after a normal looper. So I'm thinking about things like the Chase Bliss Mood, the Chase Bliss Habit, things by Red Panda. I'm thinking specifically of the Tensor, which is like a tape loop emulator. And what's great about the volume pedal after these style of effects is that you can sort of control the volume of the fade out. Instead of just cutting off your loop and having this juxtaposition of a large sound filling a lot of space to immediate silence, you can get this live studio fade effect by slowly fading out the loop and then turning it off afterward. This is going to give you a little bit more of an organic transition than just stomping your loop pedal off and having nothing playing. So what we're going to do is listen to me do this on actually the last half of the intro video that you didn't get to hear, because I do some looping with my mood and tensor at the end that I then fade out. So one more opportunity to look at my root socks, but after that we're going to come back and we'll talk about if there are any disadvantages to that, and then we'll do a little bit of an outro and talk about where I'm putting a volume pedal and for what reason. All right, and so what you heard there was me creating a weird reverse tape loop that I put a bunch of reverb on and then just slowly faded out so we didn't get some obnoxious cutoff or my inability to stomp two pedals at once. And I felt like it gave us a really nice effect that creates this organic exit from a pretty aggressive glitchy loop. So no real advantages to having the pedal in front of your glitchy loopers, but that's a really cool effect when you have it after your glitchy loopers. So finally, now that we have all this information about volume pedals and where they might be good to put on a pedal board, where am I actually putting my volume pedal? Well, I'm going to put a picture of my pedal board up on screen so you can kind of see what I'm talking about, but I have a much smaller volume pedal that I'm using, and it's on the far left bottom corner of my pedal board. And I tried to use this for most of the video because it's a really common Dunlop product that anybody could pick up at a Guitar Center, but you know, mine is just smaller so it can fit on the pedal board. There's no real difference between them. They fill the same role. So if we look at my pedal board, what we'll see is that I have a drive section up front. There's, you know, a fuzz, clean boost, overdrive, another overdrive. Then I hit my sort of glitchy effects. Those are going to be the Red Panda Tensor and the Mood. And then right next to those, you see that volume pedal before it routes back up to the top, where I have my modulation, then my delay, then my reverb. So I put it here where it's after my drives and after my glitchy looping, so that I can do those two effects that I talked about earlier, where I can have full saturation from my drives that I can control, and it can also allow me to fade out any glitchy loops that I create without getting like a harsh cutoff. And then it's also able to be before my ambient wet effects so that I can do those fade-ins that I talked about earlier. Now, like I said, you can get the same effect by putting it after at the very end of your chain, but I personally just like to control it from the front It lets me decide when I'm fading in that sound as opposed to hoping I miss that initial strum if the delay is set a little bit more aggressively. So that's where I'm running mine. There's no wrong answers here. I just wanted you guys to have all the information. You can set your pedal boards up however you want, and the volume pedal can go anywhere. But, you know, I tried to put mine in a place that maximized things that were important to me, which were controlling volume saturation level and fading out those loops so I didn't get harsh cutoffs during live sets. With that, thank you so much for listening. I hope you guys learned something. Again, please like and subscribe. That kind of thing really helps me out, and it'll build a bigger community for us to talk about more gear. I hope to see you guys in the next video. My name was Alec Wenzel, and I'll talk to you later.